Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep, dark forest of fear, and let's pray we see sunrise in the morning. Tonight's show is a creepy and scary compilation of stories. I hope you guys enjoy these as much as I. Of course, as ever, please do let me know down below in the comments, and as ever, please do like and share. Without further ado, let's get into tonight's first story, entitled The Thing from the Pit. Let's get straight into that. I bought my little farm about 6 years ago and soon carved out a quiet, rural existence in the lower Tennessee Valley. Growing up, I never expected to find myself living a blue-collar lifestyle. I couldn't even fathom such a thing. I had ambitions to make something of myself and worked very hard to get ahead in the city. For every inch forward I'd clawed in the rat race, someone else would step on me in their pursuit to get ahead too and push me back to the starting point. Eventually, I grew tired of the dog-eat-dog world and gave it up. I had enough and just walked away. With my business experience, I could use and apply what I had learned almost any place. At my farm, I could see the fruits of my labour almost immediately. It was hard work, but I was only competing against myself. If it failed or prospered, it was on me. Other than the bank, no one else cared. I left the rats behind. By the second year, I was raising enough food to feed myself. By the fourth, I grew enough crops to partially supplement my primary income. As of this year, I stand to make a substantial sum as a part-time farmer. That brings me to the hole. In the backyard by the woods there used to be a massive old oak. It was gnarled and not long for this world. By my second year here, it had died and begun to crumble. 2 years later, the behemoth had collapsed to a pile of rotten rubble. I just let it be. There was always something else around the farm that needed to be done. I elected to let nature take its course. I suppose I'd grown so used to seeing decaying carcass that I didn't even notice last year when it was all but gone. To my amazement, the crumbled trunk and pile of rotting limbs had collapsed upon itself like a black hole and was now replaced by a huge pit in the ground. I guess the extensive root system had completely dissolved the ground table beneath it and caused the instability, fearing that the sinkhole might erode even further. I used my long-range RC drone to survey the depth of the massive vertical pit and transmit video back to my computer. With no bottom in sight, I knew it was deep, but I wasn't prepared for the extent of it. I never reached the bottom, like at all. My transmitter warned me I was nearing the end of its 3/4 mile range. I had to bring the drone back up before it permanently lost contact with the remote. I was amazed. It seemed impossible that I had a bottomless pit on my property, but I knew the drone didn't lie. Shake your head in disgust if you want, but the pragmatist in me decided to use the massive pit for a practical purpose. I had brush, old tree branches, unwanted dirt and dozens of other things that I would have hauled off or burned. With the pit, I had my very own bottomless landfill. Obviously, I didn't want to pollute my ground's water. That would be stupid and irresponsible. I care about those things, so in the past 6 months, I've been tossing in every biodegradable item I could find into the 30-foot wide chasm. Despite my aggressive efforts, there was no sign of it filling up. It allowed me to clear up all of the unsightly brush and lawn trimmings from my land and from the adjacent woods. Every time I came across outdoor clutter, I'd just dump it into the unquenchable pit. Last month, my beloved brown lab Snickers was struck and killed by a car on the main highway. I was heartbroken when I found him. That dog was the most loyal companion I'd ever had. I always assumed he'd live at least another 5 years, but it wasn't to be. I actually intended to dig him a proper grave, but the spot where I tried to bury him was like excavating concrete. Try as I might, I couldn't get the space, much more than a foot in depth. It was going to be too shallow to avoid the coyotes in the woods from digging him up. Ever the realist, I reasoned that it was no sign of disloyalty to just send his remains to the bottom of the old oak's root shaft. What's the difference? I asked myself. Dead is dead, right? Regardless. I still felt a little guilty as I sent his broken body cascading downward like some sort of sacrificial offering to the Lord of the Pit. Admittedly, it was an unceremonious ending to a wonderful relationship. I elected to mourn about the loss in my own way. That night I was awakened about 4 AM by the most ungodly roar I've ever heard. The booming shriek pierced the calm of the night air and echoed throughout the entire valley like a crashing military plane. I might have thought I was dreaming, but every dog for miles howled and barked at the sustained, dissonant shriek. Whatever it was, I wanted no part of it. I just tried to drown out the cacophony with a pillow over my ears. That might have been the end of this story, but at an infinite... But had an infinitely more terrifying thing happen the next morning. Something I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't witnessed it with my own eyes. Snickers came back. I don't know what brought him back or how he crawled out of that damn pit, but it was definitely him. While he was basically the same in appearance, there were some major differences in his personality. He didn't recognise me. His once loving, puppy dog brown eyes were now the deepest hue of coal black that I had ever seen. They were every bit as black as the pit that I had tossed him into the night before. His attitude and demeanour changed drastically too. My dead pal approached me in a hunting stance, like I was his next meal. When he tried to attack me like a possessed rabid animal, I was forced to dispatch him, again, with my trusty 12 gauge. This time I doubt he will return. As if that wasn't surreal enough, I discovered that the oak shaft has been disturbed by an unknown creature of immense size from deep within. All around the rim of the pit, there were large chunks of missing earth. Some massive beast had clawed its way up the shaft and tore its way out the hole. Heaven help us all. That unknown thing was now loose upon the unsuspecting world. I dared to follow its claw-like tracks until they left the border of my farm property. From where it went, or what prey it sought, I do not know. If there are others like it at the bottom of the pit, I shall not awaken them with more unintended flesh offerings. I buried Snickers in another spot, under 5 bags of concrete to keep his corpse down permanently. May the dog that I loved finally rest in peace, and may the shrieking beast of the pit return back to hell whence it came. Something keeps leaving dead animals on my 3rd story deck. I found myself thinking over the last few days. I know it's probably not a good thing for me to think so much, to just sit and stew. But it's all I really have to occupy myself aside from the pile of books in the corner, video games I've just played through a dozen times over, and surfing through the internet. You all know that sort of boredom, the one that saps the pleasure from everything you do while imparting a restless energy. That's how it's been for the past week now. Given the things that have been happening to me the past few days, or what I think has been happening, I guess it's no surprise that I've been spiralling down into a maudlin contemplation. The question that's been plaguing me is a simple one, on the face of it at least. A basic, would you rather scenario. The two options are either that souls exist, or that they do not. Weird question, I know. But humour me and my existential crisis for a while. The first option, that there is no such thing as a soul, means that every religion that currently exists is false, and that only a material world exists. The second option, that souls, human or otherwise, exist, means that there is at least one religion that is true, or in part true. Both of these options currently terrify me. You could probably guess why the first option is horrifying enough. Upon death, you will no longer exist. That's what scares the shit out of me. I don't want to not exist. I want to live. I want to live forever. Non-existence is, well, unimaginable. How do you even process that thought? that everybody you know and love will eventually be nothing more than decaying dust, never to return, never to exist again. The second option is something that I just find horrifying. However, you have a soul. I have a soul. That means that we will always exist forever, from now to always, to infinity. We will exist. But think about that. What if they're right, and there is a heaven and a hell? I don't want to be in hell. If the option is between hell and non-existence, I don't know which I'd pick. But there is more that is implied by existence of hell and souls. The immaterial world. What else exists outside our own narrow perception? Bound as we are by the physical, demons, Satan, something else that regards us as nothing more than algae to be scrubbed out of an old bucket left with a few inches of water in it. Is there something that hates us, that always has hated us and always will? See my struggle. I don't know which is preferable. I'll come back to this later on. Just bear with me. I live in this little town way up in Michigan. We're not far from the Wisconsin border, about an hour and a half drive from Marquette going southwest. You can probably figure out my general area from there, but I'm not going to come out with it and say what the town name is for a few reasons. It's been snowing here for a good long time. We've got a good 3 feet outside, which sounds like a lot if you're from farther south. Most years we can expect anywhere between 50 or 70 inches. Eventually, my little town doesn't really have much infrastructure to deal with the snow, especially since we haven't been hit too hard this year. So, when a blizzard rolled in, we just locked down and hoped that our helpful neighbours with the snowplough would be kind enough to dig us out, because we never got a plough for our truck and... I'm rambling. Let's just say that the snowploughs got snowed in without warning, and they just barely salted any roads. So, we're just putting everything on hold, I guess, for now. No problem for me, or most of my neighbours. We all hunt and we've all got decent supply of food that will keep. Generators and propane camping stoves. That's the good news. The bad news is that I can't decide if I'm losing my mind or not. Up here, in the frozen north, just south of the magical land known as Canada, a lot of weird stuff happens. Nothing major, not paranormal activity levels of strange, but just a baseline weirdness that nobody really talks about. The weirdness is what I'm concerned about. Specifically, I'm afraid that the weirdness has become hostile towards me. Or that, again, I'm losing my mind. I'll give you a great example. I was in the truck with a few buddies and we were headed back to my place to get shit-faced after going to a strip club one town over. It wasn't quite dark yet, and it was in the middle of summer, so no snow or ice to obscure the vision. There wasn't even any mist. All of a sudden, we see a deer materialise out of the trees down the road. It sprints across the road and behind it. We see this wolf. It comes out of the trees behind the deer, and I swear it was as big as our car. In less than a second, they were gone into the trees, and we just kept on driving. To really get this, you have to understand that wolves don't usually chase things. They stalk, pounce on a weak member of the herd, and kill it without too much effort. Wolves also don't hunt alone either. Wolfman? Probably not. Weird? You bet your ass. This whole thing started one early morning, when I went outside to watch the snowfall. I live outside of town, a few miles out, that sits right on the shore of a tiny lake. The plot of land is fairly small, so instead of building out, my family decided to build up. My house is a 3-story structure made of insulated logs with a large fireplace on each floor that feeds into a larger stone chimney. On each floor is a deck that looks out and over the tiny lake. The top deck, the bottom deck are usually covered in snow, but the second-story deck somehow manages to stay mostly clean. This second deck is a beautiful place to sit, bundled up and sipping coffee, while the snow blankets the world. The blizzard struck in the middle of the night, without so much as a warning, which explains why we were all caught with our pants down on the road situation. By the time I woke up, something around 7:30, 3 feet of snow was resting like a thick blanket over the lake. I took this opportunity to go out onto my deck, which had managed to escape all but a light dusting, and drink some coffee. To quote David Wong, "It would have been a perfect opportunity to smoke a pipe, had I owned one, and had I been 40 years older." I rocked back and forth in my chair, sipping the steaming mug of black liquid as light flurries fell from grey skies. Times like this, I was content. I'm not a massive nature buff, but despite the isolated town filled with Youper woodsman hicks, I just like solitude and silence and cool weather. Times like this, I could have it all at once. I could sit and stare forever, watching little mesmerising snowflakes fall. Unfortunately, something chose that exact time to fuck with me, and has been fucking with me ever since. I closed my eyes and leaned back. I'd broken through that wall of caffeination, going from hyper alert back down to sleepy. I guess that's what happens when you have a pot and a half of black coffee. I cracked my eyes open a bit to look over the lake again. Something above me broke the silence, a scuffling, flapping noise like a bird with a broken wing flailing around. I looked straight up at the deck above me. Snow was coming over the edge in little puffs as I heard the sound move towards the deck rail. What the shit? I asked the air. I stood and stilled myself for whatever early morning wildlife shenanigans I would be forced to deal with. It was too damn early for this. Goodbye, relaxing day. Hello, half hour of guilt for breaking the neck of an injured loon. I was too zoned out on coffee to realise that if it was a loon, its migratory pattern was off. I downed the rest of my coffee like a shot of strong liquor and headed up to the 3rd floor, which was my main man cave. I came up the stairs and looked towards the windows. Through the sliding glass door I could see the owl, wing bent the wrong way and flapping in the snow. As I came up, the thing's head whipped over towards me, big yellow eyes burning holes in my forehead. Blood poured down one side of its body, staining the snow pink and the brown feathers black. How the hell did you get up here? I asked. The thing obviously couldn't fly, and there was a lot more blood than I would expect if it hurt itself within the last minute between me noticing it and coming up the stairs. Maybe a bigger bird dropped it onto my roof and fell down onto the deck. I looked around my penthouse man cave for something to put over its head. I whipped a sheet off the floor. I didn't remember why I had the sheet up here, but it would work. I opened the door and the owl screamed at me. Jesus, shut up! I shouted back, flailing with the sheet as the owl flowered with a broken wing. I chased it around the deck for a solid 10 minutes before it sprinted into the open glass door. If you've never chased an owl around in 3 feet of snow only to have that owl run inside your house and begin bleeding on your floor, let me tell you, that shit is exhausting. I managed to get the sheet over the owl's head and it immediately calmed down. I brought it down to the ground floor and locked it in my bathroom while I dialed the local vet's office. I told the vet my situation and he advised me to use something to calm the owl down, or drug it if I happened to have a pile of Vicodin laying around. Then he told me how to bind the wing until I could deliver the owl to a fish and game department office. As it happened, I looked into raising goats a while back and purchased some DIY veterinary supplies. Surprisingly, I was able to get my grubby paws on some tranquilizer, so I used some of this to drug the owl into a drunken stupor before attempting to reset the wing and bind it down so it couldn't injure itself. The reason this whole story starts here is what I found on the owl's wing. About halfway up the bicep of the owl's left wing, there was a bleeding wound. I expected this. What I didn't expect was the pattern of the wound. I'm sure you've all been bitten by something at one point in your lives. A sibling, a playmate, some arsehole kid in the park. If it broke the skin, you know what the wound looked like. A fairly distinctive pattern of flat and pointed teeth that marks your aggressor as human. That same pattern was across the owl's wing, like somebody had just pulled it from the air and taken a bite out of it. Then, somehow threw it up onto my 3rd-story deck without me seeing. I let the owl wobble around the house, watching it as it bumped off furniture and stumbled gracefully around. I blocked off the stairs with a few of the spare boxes that were laying around so the thing didn't fall down and hurt itself anymore. I went back out onto the deck and sat there a while longer, wondering at the weird owl and how it managed to make itself up here. After a while, I went back inside and carried the owl up into the man cave, where it watched me watch TV. The miracles of satellite television and satellite internet cannot be exaggerated out in nowhere, Michigan. Nothing happened the rest of that day, just me and the owl, which was passed out in a chair for most of the time, sleeping off the drugs. The next morning, I gave the owl a bit of a raw deer and went out onto the second-story deck to drink my coffee and stare at the lazily drifting snow. Over the previous day, another 3 inches had fallen. Today looked like it wouldn't be much more than that. It was calm, peaceful. Plop. Something landed in my coffee. It didn't register until I was taking another sip and I heard the tiny smacking noise of water dripping onto the plastic-coated winter jacket. I looked down. A spot of red was slowly sliding down my jacket. I registered the plop of water droplet landing in my coffee and spat out my mouthful of tainted liquid. Oh, I shuddered before realising what the liquid was. I jumped back and went back inside. Oh, God, are you shitting me? I swear to sweet baby Jesus, if your dumb ass is bleeding on my deck. I stopped as I saw the owl, I and me, tiny shred of meat hanging from its beak. Oh, God, another one. I threw my coffee down onto the table and went upstairs, making sure to close the deck door behind me so that the owl didn't make a 2-story dive. It followed me up, walking up the steps behind me, head bobbing up and down as it went. I reached the top and saw the owl amble around me, stopping and looking back as if to say, "Are you coming?" I went out onto the deck, pausing at the massive steaming red pink stain out there. I took a step out and felt ill. A dead, half-eaten animal lay on the deck, purple guts steaming in the cold. The owl had followed me out and began to pick at the remains. I picked him up and set him back inside. The animal looked like an otter, or maybe a cat. I couldn't really tell. Most of the skin off the skull was missing, and there were notches cut into the bone of a human's teeth. Same pattern as the one on the owl. Speaking of the owl, it was pecking on the glass behind me. I turned to shoo it away, and the bird was picking at a faux sheepskin rug across the room. The tapping persisted, maybe a microsecond after I turned. Without an apparent source of the sound, I suddenly dreaded staying on the deck any longer. I made a snap decision to throw the thing over the railing and deal with it when the snow melted. The warm body flopped limply in my hand as I pulled back my arm to toss it. I nearly squealed as the lukewarm rope of intestine bounced off my hand. It was somehow far more disgusting than a regular dead animal. I threw it and watched it disappear under the 3 feet of fresh snow, leaving a corpse-shaped hole and a smear of pink behind. I shuddered one last time before returning inside. The rest of the second day, I swore I could hear tapping everywhere. If you have a nail or a file or a knife or anything metal on your person at the time of reading this, I want you to stand up, go find the nearest window and tap on it with that metal object. Start at a regular tap. Nice loud noise, right? Now keep tapping, softer and softer until you can barely hear it. Come back and sit down, and as you read this, imagine that you're hearing that tapping, faint and distinct, but distant and almost indistinguishable against the sound of silence. Imagine you're alone, or that you're in a room with everybody else within a mile of where you are. Imagine that you hear that tapping, and you know it's not an animal, and you know it's not a person. So, what is it? Things picked up speed on the third day. The remaining blood had dribbled through the seams of the third-story deck and formed a cluster of red icicles hanging down over my chair. I didn't drink my coffee outside today. I went up to the third floor and sat staring out at the large windows at the deck, at the slick pink ice, and waiting for something or anything to happen. My owl friend sat on the coffee table, chewing at a strip of raw deer steak. I could hear it tear off the meat and snip muscle with its beak. It set me on edge. I hadn't managed to get much sleep the previous night, with the nocturnal sounds of the owl and the rhythmic tapping of something. The coffee barely helped. I sighed. My eyes drooped and my head nearly fell into my coffee cup. The gentle steam felt good on my stiff face. Something thumped on the deck. My head snapped up and I nearly spilled the coffee on myself. It took me a second to process what was going on and what I was seeing, and what I thought I had seen, when my head came up. For a nanosecond, a fraction of time too small, it might as well have not existed. I swear that I saw something standing there, grinning, with a mouth of pearly, off-white teeth. Another fucking corpse was laid out on my deck, dissected into organs with pink bones and yellow fat and bloody skin. What the hell? I nearly broke my coffee cup. Somebody was fucking with me. I stood ready to go out and... I could see the glass pane vibrate with each little noise. Something was outside and I couldn't see it. I called the police and had an infuriating and pointless conversation with one of the small town cops. He was stuck home. One secretly had made it into the office and was forwarding calls. She'd only been able to get there because she lived a block away from the station, and she had snowshoes. To hear them talk, it was like the world was ending. I'm sorry, sir, but we can't make it. There's too much snow. I wanted to call bullshit, but we got this much every year. So I didn't. I just hung up. I grabbed some beer and contemplated using some of that tranquilizer on myself. Remember when I told you to go tap on some glass? I want you to do something else for me now, just so you know what it's like the rest of the day. Go find a dark room. I don't care which one, as long as it has a door and at least one wall. Open the door all the way and turn off all the lights. It's fine if there's a bit of light coming in from another room or the hallway or whatever. Just make sure the room you're in is dark. Make sure the door is open all the way, touching the wall. Now look into that tiny space between the back of the door and the wall, where it's hard and dark to see. Now look around the room. The dark spots, like the corners and the shadows cast by the furniture. Look at those too. Now imagine that every time you walk into a room, you see shapes melding back into the darkest shadows, hiding from your sight, unwilling to be seen. Now imagine that you hear tapping behind you, at your window. That's how I felt. The fourth day came and I got a better look at the thing that haunted me. I can't honestly describe to you what it looked like. Any words I say would be like describing the beauty of a rainbow or a sunrise as nifty colours. It stayed in my vision longer, or was burned into my mind as an after image now. Recall the classic illustrations of Mothman, human form without a head, big red eyes set into shoulders, etc. Now take away the wings, and colour the whole thing the colour of deep space. Now put mouths of all shapes and sizes across every inch of its body. Make the mouth somehow blacker than the deep space colour of the rest of the thing. That is coming close to what I saw. The thing on the deck. I'd realised now that there were things in my house as well, hiding in corners and watching me with beady little invisible eyes. I couldn't sleep with them watching. I couldn't shit with them watching. I couldn't shower with them watching. I resorted to moving all the lamps and lights to the ground floor, where I had everything I needed. The windows looked out onto the deck, and they had thick blinds that, augmented with some duct tape and quilts, I set up the lamps so that there isn't any darkness anywhere on the ground floor. I'm free of the prying eyes at least. The owl probably thinks I've blown my lid at this point, though he's satisfied with a food and warm place to sleep. I've been keeping a fire going for a while too, to keep them out of the chimney. Did I mention that? Sorry. Rabbit trail again. I'm not running on much sleep here. So, all this has been done, and I made it through day 4 and 5 like this, sitting around, pacing around, lying around and thinking. Then day 6 is when it really hit the fan. Blood started dribbling through the ceiling. I'm trying to ignore it, but I'm not sure how long I can go for. In my dreams, there's something outside that surrounded the property. Something that is filled with hatred and disdain for me, but hungry for suffering. Little bite wounds are appearing on my arms whenever I blink or have my eyes closed too long. I know somehow that there isn't an escape. The only thing I can figure out is how the owl figures into it all. Well, that and the aforementioned game of Would You Rather. I'm paranoid right now. I keep thinking back to one time when I read that during World War II, they used to pick up people to be spies and send them running across the barren fields of trenches, followed by gunfire. It was supposed to make them look like deserters, like they wanted to join the other side. Sometimes they would even ring the spy to make it look better. I really don't want the owl to be evil. I know I should kill it and be safe. But I like the thing. Is that stupid? Remember the Would You Rather game? Remember how I told you I'd get back to it? This is me getting back to it. Normally, I'd roll with the punches, take things as they went, accept my destiny and all that. Or at least I'd hope I would, normally. I wouldn't be in this situation, but this isn't normal. You've got to understand one thing before I send this out and likely die screaming, or get committed. I don't know whether or not I'm insane. Is the supernatural real? Am I insane? Which would be preferable? I want to be right, but I want to be wrong at the same time. If I'm insane, then none of this is real. But I don't know that I'll spend the rest of my life hearing tapping and seeing things in the shadows. If this is real, God help us all if this is real. Either way, I thought I should warn you and get my story out there before something kills me, or I decide I'm insane. Take it from a guy who knows. If you ever find injured animals, dead animals, if you ever hear a tapping behind you, if you ever see things in the shadows, if those things even start whispering to you, run like hell, because they're telling me that something is coming down the steps right now. I have a daughter, a 4-year-old shining star that brightens up my life every day. Her mother was diagnosed with cancer years before the pregnancy and unfortunately didn't survive. Paige, my daughter, was her last wish before her life would come to a stop. The only thing my wife had left behind for me. She was my will to live and everything I cared about in this dark and disturbing world. I made sure I could offer Paige anything she would ever desire, not raising her as a spoiled brat, of course. I made sure I could give her the best life I had to offer. Lately, however, I have been finding it difficult fulfilling tasks, such as taking her to the park to play, to cook together and read her a bedtime story. I have been having pains, and with pains I don't mean headaches or regular cramps people get here and there. My body has been feeling like it would tear apart. The least I could do was bring Paige to nursery and, of course, pick her up, but she could tell I wasn't feeling well and therefore didn't expect much of me for my sake. She was such a good girl. She would let me know when she was hungry and when she was tired, and in between those times, she would occupy herself. It was times like these when I could pat myself on the shoulder and be proud of the way I'd raised her. But even if it was practical rather than mental thing I did, I couldn't if I tried. My body was aching so much, and I eventually called in sick at work and explained the situation to the nursery. I managed to get myself and Paige to stay home for a couple of days, and while that did make Paige happy, since she got to spend more time with me, she was increasingly getting more and more worried about me as the days strolled by. I could tell. She would be the one to wake me up, with an absolute adorable attempting of making me what she would call breakfast. Bread that had been ripped apart in the middle, due to the butter that must have stuck to the plastic knife a bit too much when she tried spreading it. On top of it, a lump of jam mixed with the leftover butter from the knife, half-heartedly spread. She would place it on my lap and run back towards the kitchen, only to return with a plastic kid's cup that was filled with her favourite multivitamin juice and a wide smile on her face. She must have felt very accomplished taking care of me like she was. I won't lie, I held my tears back a couple of times she did things like that. It was astounding to me how much more mature she was than I would have given her credit for. I guess it's my sense of overprotection since my wife died. I don't know if I could continue this life if I'd lose Paige too. So I swore to myself that I would protect her as long as I lived. More days went by of Paige acting like she was a super nanny, and it amused me in a way, but the pain was getting worse. Eventually, I managed to get myself and Paige up and out to the house to pay the doctor a visit. Obviously, they couldn't find anything that could be wrong with me, and gave me some painkillers for my headaches before referring me to the local hospital, just for them to tell me that it was nothing but a bug. Nothing but a bug. I have been on this planet for quite a few years and have dealt with quite a few fucking bugs. This was not a bug. I got angry with the nurse and started getting loud. Perhaps it was the pain that fueled my rage, but I was fuming and let it out on the staff. If it wasn't for Paige pulling my hand and asking if we could go home now, I would probably ended up starting a fight. I couldn't do that in front of her. I am the role model, and that means to be as best of an example as I could be. I left with a raspy grumbling and put a happy face on for the ride back home so that Paige wouldn't have to worry. She knew that I wasn't well. Whatever it was that caused it, I didn't want her to have to be worrying more than she was. I guess you could say I kept most of my pain hidden from her, but in reality, as much as I wanted to believe she thought it was a normal cold or something simple, I knew she understood this wasn't normal. It was indeed not normal. I would wake up night after night, standing in the garden and gazing at the moon after opening my eyes. It was disturbing. I hadn't remembered leaving the house in the middle of the night to go outside in the first place. And what puzzled me was why I would find myself standing in the same place each night. Why was I always facing the moon? I thought of the horror story I once read about the werewolf back in my childhood. But as I realised how absurd it was, I started laughing to myself. There was no way. There had to be a plausible explanation to this, right? What I previously referred to as pain eventually became something I would call torture. The pain was unimaginable, and any sort of help I seeked ended up being pointless. Nobody seemed to have dealt with this, whatever it was, before. I had my blood test taken, just to be informed that everything was normal. I had scans and even tried massages, but neither of them showed any sort of result. 3 days ago, it was getting close to something Paige was really looking forward to. A full moon. She always has this obsession with the planets and the universe. Ever since she had a planet workshop thing in early nursery days, she would tell me all about what she had learned about the galaxy, and I could tell it was something that she would be very interested in for a long time. I decided that despite my condition and considering the amount of letdowns I had let her deal with for the past couple of weeks, I would pull myself together and sit in our garden to watch it happen together. I was sure she would like that very much and wanted to do something for her since she had been taking care of me so very well. For the next 3 days, until full moon, my condition seemed to be somewhat different. I had become physically stronger than I'd ever been at any point in my life, and considering that all I had done for the few weeks was lay in bed, resting as much as I could, it struck me as weird. I could feel it. Something was happening to my body. However, I wasn't sure exactly what it was. The pain, though, continued. I would experience muscle tensing until it felt like they would split apart. My stomach twisted and turning until I would throw up, and blood pumping through my body at a speed that it gave me what it seemed to be an everlasting migraine. My nights were spent rolling and turning around in bed as I tried to cool myself down, having blackouts and again finding myself standing outside staring at the sky, screaming, and incredible increases of hair growth on places such as my chest, arms and legs. It felt like a monster was evolving inside of me. I have no other way of explaining it. This was not normal, and the fact that it disabled me from taking care of Paige, as I had once done for a full 4 years prior, really upset me. Today was the day, however. I informed Paige about my plans and watched her eyes light up in excitement. I made her some food before we could go outside to witness the rare sight of a full moon. While she munched down on her food, I escaped into my room to grab my coat. I walked around my bed, past the window, and glanced outside to check up on the moon. As soon as my eyes met the moon, I collapsed in pain. No, the torture became so intense that I couldn't handle it anymore. My head was aching and pulsing. Every single vein felt like exploding. My arms, my legs, my stomach and back tensed up to an extreme. I was sure my skin would rip apart from the pressure my bones were putting on it. I then watched in horror as my nails grew longer into what I realised to be claws, and the skin on my arms turned black. Already on my knees, I supported myself by pressing my hands onto the floor as hell was unleashing inside of me. My eyesight became red, and I felt the hair all over my body grow into dog's length as I changed shape. My mouth grew teeth I haven't had before. My fingers grew longer as I watched my legs grow black and muscular. I noticed that under my muffled crying and panting, Paige had stopped making her usual slurping sounds. Had she noticed me? I prayed to God she would stay in the living room as a blood-curdling scream exited my lungs that I didn't recognise as my own, and my new body rose up. I turned my head to face the mirror next to me, and there I was. No, there it was. The thing that had caused me hell on earth for a while now. The thing that had came close to ruining my life and drive me insane was standing in the mirror, looking back at me. It was what humans would refer to as a werewolf, but the actual sight of one let my blood run cold. I had turned into a monster and felt my thoughts beginning to be altered by a sense of bloodlust. The thing I had evolved into had an immense primal instinct that screamed for death. Just before it completely consumed my own thoughts, therefore turning me into a horror story told all around the world, I heard a scared, tiny, high-pitched voice behind me.
Daddy?
Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that compilation of scary, strange and downright treacherous encounters. Of course, please do let me know down below in the comments as ever. Please do like and share. And above all, when you're out in a deep dark forest, keep your wits around you and your eyes and ears open. And remember, be safe, not sorry.